Grandpa, maybe it's time you stopped pretending you understand what we're building here. That's what my own son said to me. Into a microphone, in front of 43 investors, the entire board, and the film crew from Bloomberg West who'd flown in to cover what was supposed to be our Series C announcement. He was wearing the watch I bought him for his Stanford graduation. He didn't even look at me when he said it. The Four Seasons in Palo Alto smelled like jasmine and freshly pressed money that Wednesday afternoon. I'd worn the navy suit my wife picked out, the one she said made me look trustworthy, but not stuffy. I was sitting in the third row on the aisle because I'd learned a long time ago that you always want a clear path to the exit when other people are doing the talking. My name is Russell Aiken. I'm 58 years old. For 31 years, I've been a structural engineer. And for the last 12 of those, I've been the chief architect of a robotics company that, on paper, my son Marcus runs. On paper, that afternoon, Marcus stood up there in his $3,500 Tom Ford suit, ran his hand through hair he gets cut every 2 weeks at a place that charges what I used to make in a day, and proceeded to explain to a room full of venture capitalists that the company was transitioning beyond its founding era constraints. That's the phrase he used. Founding era constraints. I was the founding era constraint. He had slides. 46 of them. I counted because I had nothing else to do while he stood up there describing innovations I'd designed, patents I'd filed, contracts I'd negotiated, all in the first-person plural. We pioneered. We engineered. We disrupted. The investors nodded along like he was reading scripture. Then came slide 31, my photograph from the company website. Underneath it, the words Leadership Evolution. My father, Russell Aiken, has been an extraordinary contributor to this company's foundation, Marcus said, his voice taking on that warm, regretful tone you hear at funerals. But the truth is, the future of robotics belongs to a generation that grew up with these systems in their hands, not minds trained on slide rules and steel beams. A few nervous laughs from the back. The Bloomberg cameraman repositioned for a better angle on my face. Dad, would you stand? Let everyone thank you for everything you've done. I didn't stand. He waited. The room waited. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but my hands stayed loose on my thighs. After maybe 7 seconds, Marcus chuckled and turned back to the audience. Some habits die hard. He always was stubborn. Grandpa, maybe it's time you stopped pretending you understand what we're building here. That was when the room laughed for real. Not the polite kind. The kind that happens when people in expensive shoes feel relieved that the awkwardness is over. I waited until the laughter trailed off. Then I lifted my hand, the way you do in a classroom when you actually want to be called on. Marcus, I said, and I made sure my voice carried. Before you continue, would you do me one small favor? Would you ask Patricia to read Schedule C3 of the Founders Agreement into the record? The microphone clicked once, then went silent. Marcus looked at me, the way a man looks at a dog that's just spoken English. Patricia Quill, our general counsel, was sitting at the long table near the side wall with her laptop open. I watched her face change. Not all at once. First, the eyebrows came down. Then her hand stopped moving on the trackpad. Then her lips parted slightly, the way they do when someone realizes they've left the stove on at home. Schedule C3, Marcus said. He tried to laugh. It came out wrong. Dad, this isn't really the time for... Patricia has the document, I said. Schedule C3. The provision about ownership of foundational intellectual property in the event of an officer's involuntary removal without cause. 1 page. She has it. Patricia did not look at Marcus. She looked at me. She looked at me for what felt like a long time, and then she stood up. Mr. Aiken, she said. And I noticed she didn't say Marcus. She didn't say the CEO. She said my name. Schedule C3 reads as follows. She'd printed it. She'd actually printed it out, kept it in a manila folder, and I knew right then that Patricia Quill had been waiting for this day longer than I had. Maybe even since the year she warned me about a few things at a Christmas party and I told her I'd handle it. She cleared her throat. In the event that Russell Aiken, founder and original principal engineer, is removed from his position as Chief Technology Officer, or publicly terminated, demoted, or reassigned without documented cause as defined in Section 9A. All foundational intellectual property, authored or principally architected by said founder, including, but not limited to, control systems source code, kinematic algorithms, proprietary actuator designs, sensor fusion protocols, and the trade secrets contained within the company's 217 patent filings prior to fiscal year 2022 shall revert in full to the founder. The company shall retain no license, express or implied, to continue use of said intellectual property, and any such use following the triggering event shall constitute willful infringement actionable under federal law. You ever hear 100 people stop breathing at the same time? It sounds like a refrigerator being unplugged. Marcus's face did this strange thing. It went red, then white, then a kind of green-gray that I once saw on a man who'd just been told his wife had been hit by a truck. The investor in the front row, the one from Andreessen, set his coffee down very carefully on the carpet because his hand had started to shake. "That can't be enforceable," Marcus said. His voice had climbed up half an octave. Patricia, tell them that's not enforceable." "Marcus," Patricia said, and now there was something in her tone I'd never heard before. "Steel. It is signed by the founding board. By you. By me as witness. By outside counsel from Wilson Sangini. It has been the operative provision since 2013. You signed this when you were 26 years old, son," I said quietly, "right before I gave you the company. You signed it because you thought it was a formality." I pulled my phone out of my breast pocket, the same way I'd pull out a handkerchief at a wedding. Slow. No drama. I had an application open. It had been open for 40 minutes. I'd built it myself 6 years ago on a quiet weekend in my garage, the way other men work on cars. I tapped one button across the ballroom on the projection screens behind Marcus's head. His slides flickered and died. In their place came something I'd never shown anyone, a control panel, 1247 instances of our robotics platform, deployed at automotive plants, semiconductor fabs, distribution warehouses across 31 states, each one a green dot. Then the dots began turning red. Not all of them. I designed it carefully. Anything safety critical stayed green. Lines that, if they stopped, could send someone to the hospital stayed green. But everything else, every revenue-producing unit, every system our customers paid for, every line on a financial spreadsheet, went dark. "Russell." Marcus said it like a prayer, not a name. "Russell, please." "Dad, what did you just do?" "I didn't break anything, son," I said. I stood up then, finally. My knees popped the way they always do when I've been sitting too long. "I just stopped letting your company use my work. I just stopped letting your company use my work. There's a difference." The investor from Sequoia was already on his phone. I could hear half the room dialing. Somewhere in the back, a woman in a grey suit said the word fiduciary 3 times in a row. The Bloomberg cameraman, God bless him, kept rolling. "How?" The Bloomberg cameraman, God bless him, kept rolling. "How?" Marcus said. "I built it that way, Marcus. Every machine we ship phones home to my authentication server. You've seen the architecture diagrams 100 times. You just never read what was inside the grey boxes." A man stood up from the investor section. Older, salt and pepper beard. Forrest Brennick, our lead Series B investor, who put $40 million into the company 3 years ago and watched it grow into something worth 10 times that. "Mr. Renham." "Aiken," he said, very calmly, the way men do when they're about to lose more money than most people see in a lifetime. "What would it cost to bring those systems back online while we figure this out?" "Forrest," I said, because we'd known each other a long time. "I'm not negotiating during a board meeting, but I'll tell you, just so you can plan, that this is a licensing conversation now, not an employment one. What's your number?" $300,000 a month, per month, to keep things running while we sort out the long-term picture. Wire transfer, paid in advance, first payment by close of business tomorrow. He didn't even flinch. "And without that, the lights stay off. Your customers will start calling within the hour. I expect the press will catch wind by tomorrow afternoon. The patent infringement suit I'd file would, conservatively, take 5 years to resolve, and I don't believe your fund has 5 years." Marcus was crying. "I want to be honest about that." My son was standing on that stage, in front of cameras, in front of the people he had spent 8 years trying to impress, and there were actual tears running down his cheeks. "And I want to tell you that I felt something. Some version of guilt, or pity, or the muscle memory of having held that boy when he had croup and couldn't breathe at 3 in the morning. But mostly what I felt was tired. The kind of tired you get after carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally setting it down. I walked out of that ballroom past 43 of the most powerful investors in Silicon Valley, and not one of them looked at me. They were already typing. The valet brought my truck around, a 2014 Ford F-150. I'd been driving it since the year we'd had our first major customer, and I'd never seen a reason to replace it. I tipped the kid $20. He thanked me like I'd given him 1,000. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should tell you how we got here, because what happened in that ballroom wasn't the story. That was just the last page. The story started the day my son got his MBA. I'd founded Aiken Robotics out of my garage in 2009. I was 43 years old. I'd just been laid off from a defense contractor that decided structural engineers were redundant in the modern manufacturing environment. And my wife Diane and I had a 14-year-old son who was suddenly mortified to be seen with his unemployed father. I had $80,000 saved up. I had a patent on a flexible joint actuator I'd been tinkering with for years, the kind of thing that lets a robotic arm bend in 2 different planes without seizing up under load. And I had a wife who looked me in the eye one Tuesday morning over coffee and said, "Russell, you've been miserable for 10 years working for other men. Build the thing. We'll figure out the mortgage." I built the thing. Marcus came home from school one afternoon, his junior year, and found a robot the size of a German shepherd sorting walnuts in our kitchen. He was fascinated for about a week. Then he got embarrassed again. By the time he left for Stanford in 2013, Aiken Robotics had 11 employees, 2 patents, and our first major contract, a Detroit auto parts manufacturer that needed precision welding for transmission assemblies. I cried the day that check cleared. Diane took me out for a steak dinner I couldn't afford the week before. Marcus studied computer science, then business. He came home for the summer after his sophomore year and announced he wanted to join the family business. Diane was so happy she cried. I was happy too. I want to be clear about that. I wanted my son in the business. I wanted him to take it over someday. What I didn't know was that Marcus had spent his entire childhood watching his father get pushed around by men in better suits, and he'd decided very young that he was going to be the one in the better suit. He came in as VP of Operations. He was 23. I gave him the title because he was my son and I trusted him. He earned it the next 4 years. I'll give him that. He brought in new customers. He pushed me to take Series A money in 2017. He convinced me to hire a real management team. In 2019, I made him CEO. I was 53. I'd built the company, and I was tired, and I wanted to focus on what I was good at, which was the engineering, and let him handle the suits. The lawyer who handled the transition was Patricia Quill. She'd been our outside counsel since the beginning, and I asked her to come in-house as part of the succession. Patricia is 61 years old, divorced twice, has a daughter at Berkeley, and reads 3 legal thrillers a week. Hates surprises, loves precision. The first time she met Marcus, she came to my office and closed the door behind her. "Russell," she said, "I want you to do something for me before we finalize this transition." "What's that, Pat?" "I want you to add a few provisions to the founders' agreement. Things that protect you in case Marcus turns out to be less like you and more like the men who fired you in 2009. "Patricia, he's my son. I know he is. That's why you can't see it." I argued with her for 2 hours. She wore me down. Eventually I agreed, but only because I was sure I'd never have to use it. Patricia drafted 3 schedules. C1 covered severance. C2 covered non-competes. C3 covered non-competes. C3 covered intellectual property. I signed it. Marcus signed it. Patricia witnessed it. Wilson Sonsini countersigned it as outside counsel. The board approved it as part of a 60-page package that nobody, including Marcus, read in detail because we were all focused on the celebration. We had a cake. There was champagne. Patricia drank water and watched my son like a hawk. "He doesn't see you anymore, Russell," she told me at the elevator that night. "He sees a problem to manage." "I'm sorry." "I hope I'm wrong." She wasn't wrong. The first year went fine. Marcus called me 3 times a week. We had dinner every Sunday. He brought engineering questions to my office. I gave him answers. The company grew. We hit 50 million in revenue. We added 80 employees. The second year, Marcus hired a chief of staff, a young man named Brock who'd come from McKinsey. Brock was 28, wore Allbirds and quarter-zip pullovers, and called everyone over 45 sir in a way that made it sound like a slur. The Sunday dinners got shorter. The visits to my office stopped. I started getting CC'd on emails instead of being part of the conversation. Marcus moved his office to a different floor. By year 3, I was getting frozen out of decisions I should have been part of. Patent strategy, architecture choices, hiring senior engineers. Marcus had started using phrases like, "We need to think about technical debt," and "we need to modernize our approach in board meetings," always with a glance toward me. One Friday afternoon, I walked past the conference room and heard Marcus telling Brock, "Look, the old man built this thing, and I love him, but we can't have him in front of customers anymore. He talks about cantilever load distribution. They want to hear about AI." I kept walking. I didn't say a word. I went home and sat in my garage for 2 hours, looking at the bench where I'd built the first prototype. Diane came out and put her hand on my shoulder. I told her what I'd heard. "Russell," she said, "what are you going to do?" "Nothing yet." "Russell," she said, "what are you going to do?" "Nothing yet." "Russell, he's our son. He's also a 31-year-old man who just called his father an old man behind his back to a kid from McKinsey. I'll handle it, Di. I just need to think." I called Patricia the next morning. We met at a diner, not at the office, not at her house, at a Denny's off the 101. She ordered coffee and a short stack. I had eggs and didn't eat them. "Pat," I said, "I need you to walk me through Schedule C3 again." She didn't even look surprised. She pulled a folder out of her bag. She brought it. She'd been carrying it in her bag. "I've been waiting for this conversation for 2 years, Russell," she said. "Let's go through it." We went through it line by line. I asked her every question I could think of. What constitutes without cause? What constitutes without cause? What counts as publicly demoted? What the timing requirements were? What had to happen for the clause to trigger? "Russell, the language is unusual, but it's clean," she said. "If Marcus or the board ever takes you out of your role without documented cause, your intellectual property reverts, all of it. The company would have to license it back from you or stop operating. What's the strongest trigger? A public termination or demotion at a shareholder or investor event. That's case law gold. There's no ambiguity. There's video. There's witnesses. It's airtight. Okay." She looked at me over her coffee cup. "Are you planning something?" "No, Pat, I'm planning nothing. I'm just making sure I understand what's already in writing. Russell, if this goes the way I think it might go, you have to let me know early enough to be ready." "You'll know, Pat." I spent the next year preparing for nothing. That's what I told myself. I was just being thorough. I documented every patent I'd authored. I created a complete archive of the source code with my signature in the commit history going back 12 years. I built the kill switch application in my garage on weekends because I told myself I was practicing my coding skills. I tested it on dummy systems I set up in my basement. Diane caught me down there one Saturday night. "Russell, what are you doing?" "Just keeping my hand in." "Russell!" She sat down on the bottom step of the basement stairs. "Are you and Marcus going to be okay?" "I don't know, Di." She cried a little. Not the dramatic kind. The kind women cry when they've seen something coming for a long time. She told me she'd been watching her son turn into someone she didn't fully recognize, and she was scared to say it out loud. "He's going to do something stupid, isn't he?" she said. "I think he might. And when he does, I'll be ready. And then we'll figure out how to put the family back together, maybe." She held my hand for a while. Then she went upstairs. The slow squeeze accelerated in the fall of last year. Marcus started bringing in outside engineering consultants, young guys, all of them with names like Hudson and Asher and Crew. They'd review my architecture and write reports about legacy assumptions and next-generation approaches. Marcus would forward me the reports with notes like, "Interesting perspective, would love your thoughts." I'd write back, "Looks fine, happy to discuss." He never wanted to discuss. In November, he proposed reorganizing the engineering team and creating a new role of Chief Innovation Officer, reporting directly to him. He brought in a candidate named Trent something. Trent was 34. He'd worked at 3 startups, all of which had been acquired in fire sales. Marcus described him to the board as the future of our technical leadership. I sat in that board meeting and watched my son introduce Trent as the man who would guide our engineering vision into the next decade. Trent shook my hand afterward and said, "It's an honor to meet such a foundational figure in the industry, sir." Foundational figure. That's what they called me, like a statue. I went home that night and called Patricia. "Pat, the Series C announcement is in March. They're going to do something then. I can feel it. What do you want from me, Russell?" "I want you to be in that room, with everything, with the printed copy, with the original signatures. I want you to be exactly where you need to be." "I'll be there." I want to tell you that I felt good about all of this, that I felt righteous and prepared and like a man who had outsmarted his enemies. I didn't. I felt sick most days. I'd watch Marcus laughing on a panel at a conference, my son who used to ride on my shoulders at Little League games, and I'd feel something rotten in my stomach. But I also knew deep down that Marcus had stopped being my son in the way that mattered and become a man who saw his father as an obstacle. And there's nothing you can do for a man who sees you that way. You can only protect yourself. So I prepared. By February, I knew everything I needed to know. I knew what Marcus was going to wear. I knew which slides he was going to use. I knew because I had befriended a young engineer named Wesley who reported to Trent, and Wesley had been documenting everything because Wesley, like me, had read his employment contract carefully and noticed that he owned the things he built. I taught Wesley well. The week before the Series C event, Marcus called me into his office. First time in 5 months. He sat behind his desk like a man auditioning for a magazine cover. "Dad, I want to talk to you about the announcement next week." "Okay. I want you to be part of it. I want you to stand up at the end and pass the baton, symbolically. The company has evolved beyond founding-era leadership. It would be powerful for the room to see you bless the new direction." "Bless the new direction?" "Yes. And what is the new direction, Marcus? Trent is taking over the Chief Technology Officer role. We're announcing it Wednesday. You'll be moving to a Chairman Emeritus position. Honorary. Some board involvement. A wonderful exit." "Honorary," I said. "You've earned it, Dad." I looked at him for a long moment. My son, 33 years old. He had my mother's eyes. He used to fall asleep on my chest when he was a baby and wake up only when I tried to put him down. "Marcus," I said, "is this what you really want? It's what's best for the company, Dad." "That's not what I asked." He didn't answer. "All right, son," I said. I stood up. "I'll be at the event." He smiled. I'll never forget that smile. I'll never forget that smile. The smile of a man who thinks he's won. Wednesday came. You know the rest of that part. The first wire hit my personal account at 4:47 p.m. the next day, $300,000. Forrest Brennick, on behalf of the company, had moved fast. By Friday, I'd had every revenue-producing system back online. The safety-critical lines had never gone down in the first place. I'd designed it that way from the beginning. Marcus called me on Thursday night. 11 p.m. Drunk. "You destroyed everything I built." "You didn't build anything, son. I gave you something to run, and you tried to take it. There's a difference. You're my father. I am, and I love you. But that doesn't mean you get to humiliate me on a stage in front of 43 investors. You wanted theater. You got theater. What do I do now, Dad? You think about who you became, Marcus. You think hard, and when you're ready to be honest about it, you call me and we'll start over." He hung up. I didn't hear from him for 4 months. The licensing arrangement ran for 14 months. $300,000 a month, then $400 when they extended it, then $450 when they realized they couldn't rebuild what I'd architected without my cooperation. I deposited every check, paid the taxes, and put most of it in a fund I'd opened with Patricia's name on it as a trustee. Marcus stepped down as CEO in May. Forrest Brennick replaced him with an interim guy who actually knew robotics. Trent lasted 6 weeks before he resigned to pursue other opportunities. Brock from McKinsey vanished back to whatever consulting firm would have him. I never went back to the company. I started a new firm in Sacramento this time, on the outskirts where the rent was reasonable. Just me and 3 engineers I'd worked with for years, men in their 50s who'd been quietly pushed out of their own companies by people who looked just like Marcus. We called it North Granite Robotics, after a ridge Diane and I used to hike when we were younger. We didn't build robots for venture capitalists. We built robots for hospitals, for agricultural co-ops, for the kinds of customers who care more about reliability than press releases. We grew slowly. We're at 27 employees now. Every one of them owns the IP for what they create, with a clause that reverts everything to them if they're terminated without cause. Patricia Quill drafted it. She works for us part-time. She says it's the most fun she's had in her legal career. Wesley joined us in the 2nd month. He's good, better than I was at his age. The old company shut down 9 months after Marcus left. The investors took a bath. Forrest Brennick called me to apologize personally. I told him there was nothing to apologize personally. I told him there was nothing to apologize for. He'd been a good partner. He'd just trusted the wrong man with my company. Russell, he said, if you ever want to take outside money again, you call me first. Forrest, I'm 58 years old. I just want to build robots and have dinner with my wife. But I appreciated. Marcus called me on a Sunday afternoon in September. I was in the garage replacing a starter on the Ford. Diane answered the phone and brought it out to me with a look I couldn't read. Dad. Son. I'm in Reno. I'm working at a Tesla service center. They don't know who I am, okay? I've been seeing a therapist for 4 months. Good. I don't know what to say to you, Dad. I don't know how to say I'm sorry for what I did. I sat down on the garage floor next to the truck. The concrete was cold through my jeans. Marcus, you don't have to know how. You just have to keep calling. He started crying. I let him. I didn't say anything for a long time. Come for Thanksgiving, son. Your mother misses you. You sure, Dad? I'm sure. He came. He brought a girl named Anna, who he met at the service center. She works as a mechanic. She has grease under her fingernails and a laugh like a saw blade. Diane loved her immediately. Marcus is quieter now. He listens more than he talks. He asked me, on the 2nd day, if I'd teach him about actuator design. Why? I said. Because I never actuator design. Why? I said. I just learned how to talk about it. We spent 4 hours in the garage that Friday afternoon, just the 2 of us. I showed him the bench where I'd built the first prototype. I showed him the flexible joint that had started everything. He held it in his hands and turned it over and asked me finally the right questions. I'm not going to tell you that we're fully healed. We aren't. There are things between us that may take the rest of my life to repair, and some of them won't be repaired at all, just live with. But he calls me twice a week now. He asks about the new company. He doesn't ask to come back. He hasn't earned that, and he knows it. People ask me sometimes, when they hear the story, if I have any regrets about what I did at the Four Seasons that afternoon. The answer is no, not because I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy any of it. But because the alternative was to be a man who let his own son strip mine him in public and called it love. Loving your son doesn't mean letting him take your soul. Sometimes loving your son means handing him a consequence big enough that he might eventually become a better man on the other side of it. The fine print isn't there to hurt anyone. It's there because the world is full of people who happily lie to your face while you sign things. The fine print is the part of the page where you decide in advance who you're going to be when someone tries to break you. I decided who I was going to be in a Denny's off the 1-1 over. Eggs I didn't eat. Patricia knew. Diane knew eventually. Marcus didn't until it was too late. Read the contract. All of it. Every clause, every schedule, every footnote, especially the ones your lawyer says, are just boilerplate. Boilerplate is just a word men in better suits use when they hope you'll stop reading. I never stopped reading, and on a Wednesday afternoon in March, at a Four Seasons in Palo Alto, in front of 43 investors and a film crew from Bloomberg West that turned out to make all the difference. People ask me, when this story comes up at dinner tables or over coffee at hardware stores, whether I'm proud of what I did. I'm not proud. Proud isn't the word. What I am is honest about it, and that's a different thing. The truth is, what happened to Marcus didn't happen because I outsmarted him. It happened because, somewhere along the way, my son made small decisions that grew into larger ones, and nobody, including me, stopped him. He didn't wake up one morning and decide to humiliate his father on a stage. He decided it across hundreds of Tuesdays. The first time he didn't invite me to a meeting. The first time he laughed at a joke about the old guard. The first time he agreed with Brock that customers needed to hear about AI instead of cantilever load distribution. Every one of those moments was small. Every one of them was a choice. And choices, stacked high enough, become a man. That's the law I've come to believe in. Not karma in some mystical sense, but the simple math of causes and consequences. You water a thing, it grows. You starve a thing, it dies. Marcus watered his vanity for 10 years, and he was surprised when it bore fruit. If I have anything to leave behind for my grandchildren, when they come, it's this: be a person of your word. Not because the world will reward you for it, because most of the time it won't. Be a person of your word because the alternative is to wake up one day and not recognize the face in the mirror. Read everything. The fine print isn't a trap set by lawyers. The fine print is where adulthood lives. The people who suffer most in this country aren't the ones who got cheated. They're the ones who didn't read what they signed and then expected the world to be fair about it. The world is not fair. The contract is the only fairness you get, and only if you understood it before you signed. And do the hard work, not the visible work. The hard work, the kind that nobody claps for. The kind Patricia Quill did when she sat in a Denny's at 6 in the morning and prepared a folder she hoped she'd never have to open. The kind Diane did when she watched her son becoming someone she didn't know and held my hand through it anyway. The kind I did in my garage on Saturday nights, writing code I prayed would stay unused. Character isn't what you do when the cameras are on. It's what you do when you're alone in a basement with a soldering iron and a wife upstairs wondering if you're going to be okay. That's where men are made, or unmade. Marcus is rebuilding himself in Reno now, slower than I'd like, real than he ever was before. He may yet become the man I hoped he would be. I don't know, but I know that I gave him the only gift a father can give a son who's lost his way, which is a consequence heavy enough to wake him up. The rest is up to him. The rest is always up to us.